Hello, I'm Reverend Bacon, and this is Cinemascapes.
In today's show, we look at the apocalypse in cinema, how it relates to our current times, and how we can use the lessons from films to correctly act when the world is going to pot. Films under discussion: Independence Day, Resident Evil, the Star Wars prequels, Contagion, and Children of Men. Life under the coronavirus starkly resembles an apocalypse film. Normal life has been shut down completely, police roam the streets, and a deadly disease has spread across the world. If I walk into town, it's eerily quiet, as if everyone is hiding from something that could just come out and kill them at any moment. But on the same page, spring has arrived, birds are louder than usual, and are more likely to see wild animals. The re-emergence of nature after mankind is reduced to a secondary character on Earth, another classic trope of science fiction in itself. Major political leaders are the key actors in this mega tapestry of a world just going wrong. Their response to disaster illustrating many narratives in and of themselves. For example, Viktor Orban of Hungary using it to consolidate absolute power, Trump playing out his usual insecurities of fame in front of a ticking time bomb, and Boris Johnson believing that sheer fighting spirit alone could have defeated the virus. With the poor man himself now a victim and receiving treatment in an intensive care unit, the scriptwriters of our lives are moving things a little too on the nose. But world leaders, competent and incompetent aside, what can we actually learn about surviving apocalypses from the world of cinema? While some offer cathartic visions, as well as, in many cases, examples of mankind eventually triumphing over an evil greater than ourselves, they can also offer some practical advice. In my view, they are examples not only of sensible practices, but also examples of the things you definitely shouldn't do in the midst of an apocalypse. I wanted to explore this theme using a variety of different, contrasting science fiction films. A few may not be the ones you'd think of when the word apocalypse is bandied about, but I believe that they are still illustrative in a time of crisis. Up first, Independence Day. In my view, Independence Day is the ultimate end-of-history 90s fantasy. It sees the world, under the USA's leadership, coming together to defeat an existential crisis. While the world hasn't actually dealt with aliens yet, at least not to my knowledge, and may prove me wrong, the lack of coordination on responding to the COVID-19 outbreak suggests that this kind of cooperation is absolutely ridiculous, as is the premise that we can trust the USA to deal with anything at all. But perhaps we need fantasies such as this film, which sees mankind, however cruelly rendered through brief globe-trotting stereotypes, joining forces to fight a much bigger evil. But Independence Day, which starts with a variety of scenes of immense destruction, including the obliteration of the White House, has other key lessons to offer. Buy cigars for fights, punch aliens directly in the face, trust Jeff Goldblum, and most importantly, if aliens come to visit, Do not welcome them with open arms by dancing on top of the US Bank Tower in Los Angeles, because you will be the first person to be obliterated. Independence Day reminds us that coronavirus is not a party. As the news has shown, whether it's Mardi Gras in New Orleans or Carnival in Cologne, these kind of parties have proved breeding grounds for the disease. While you can still have fun and drink at home with your flatmates or partner, and if you are alone, maybe sing from your balcony or learn a new skill, large gatherings is just a deeply dreadful idea. The preponderance of secret parties or people not heeding these messages, especially here in Berlin, is deeply sad. We all have seen the scenes of young dumb kids at spring break in Florida saying that corona is no big deal and that partying is more important. And while it does feel like partying is more important than coronavirus when you're 18 and 19 and full of hormones, don't be like these lads. This all has to stop. Your life and the life of your loved ones is just not worth it. Independence Day comes as direct contrast to another classic apocalyptic film, Shaun of the Dead.
Sorry, grab Liz, go to the Winchester, have a nice cold pint, and wait for all this to blow over.
In this case, the Winchester is the worst place you can be.
Yeah, boy!
Next up, Resident Evil and blind faith in capitalism.
Imagine a world where you can reverse the effects of age, stress, and sun. From the leading name in biotechnology comes Regenerate. Another breakthrough from the Umbrella Corporation. Regenerate's revolutionary T-cell formula actually brings dead cells back to life.
This music is actually a madness. Anyway, in the world of Resident Evil, the Umbrella Corporation rules large. They have built a vast genetic research facility underneath Raccoon City, known as the Hive. But when a thief comes in and steals a genetically engineered T-virus, the virus quickly spreads across the entire facility, which is sealed shut by an AI known as the Red Queen, who kills everyone inside.
A deadly virus capable of contaminating the entire world has been released.
Oh my god.
We have to get out of this building.
Resident Evil shows us a slick-looking world filled with glassy, hyper-corporate interiors, portraying the ways in which slavish adherence to capitalist ideals and putting huge responsibility with regards to biohazards in the hands of one huge corporation is a huge mistake. It functions something like America's privatization of healthcare, which is a universal and basic need, writ to its most dysfunctional and potentially toxic degree. Blind faith in such an ideal, in giving one corporation so much power, can upend and give diseases more power than they ever should have. While the film is a little too hyperactive for its own good, why create such an unnerving world with homages to Alien and 2001: A Space Odyssey in its terrifying child robot, the Red Queen, before simply degrading into all-out zombie action? Paul W.S. Anderson still delivers a fascinating world of capitalism gone completely amok. For similar themes, you can also mention the By and Large Corporation of Wall-E, a true example of how this kind of slavish, unfettered capitalism can only really exacerbate the existing problems of humanity. Nonetheless, the film was given pretty slanderous reviews upon its release, but has spawned several sequels, making a huge star out of the Ukrainian, Serbian, American actress Mila Jovovich. For one thing, it's far better than the other Mila Jovovich virus-based film, Ultraviolet. Avoid that one, like the plague.
May increase your motivation to complete.
I've never failed to complete.
Up next, the Star Wars prequels and the problems with trusting democracy too much.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
In an ideal world, unfettered capitalism should be kept in check by democracy. But democracy if it grows too complicated and wearisome, can easily become a weak vessel of power. Princess Padme knows this firsthand when she tells the Galactic Senate of the Republic, a supranational EU-like organization, that her country has been under attack by the Trade Federation, and instead of springing into immediate action, they claim they will send in an independent commission to investigate her claims. It's a ridiculous moment that shows what might happen if bureaucrats get in charge of the world, paving the way for Palpatine's shifty rise to absolute power by the end of Revenge of the Sith. Like with Viktor Orban dissolving parliament and ruling by decree in Hungary, Palpatine will use any crisis available, and there are numerous threats to the Republic throughout the prequel films, to help consolidate power. Acting like a space parable for the inefficiencies of the Weimar Republic to stop the rise of Nazism, Palpatine's rise could easily be applied to the issues we are currently facing today. This makes the prequels, for all their faults, especially in the dreadful Attack of the Clones, more nuanced than any other Star Wars trilogy, asking the hard questions about democracy versus autocracy, especially in times of great need. Blind faith in democracy can only get us so far. Instead, it's important for the populace to constantly hold those in power in check, in case consultants and advisors become more important than actual leadership. Yet, on the other hand, it shows the problems when one man has too much power. It may be helpful for enacting the sweeping authoritarian changes kind of needed to combat a pandemic, but we have to make sure that the same man does not use it as an opportunity to simply create a new normal. It's worth keeping an eye out on Hungary to see how this will play out. Next up is Contagion, and not listening to quack science.
There are stories circulating on the internet that in India and elsewhere, the drug ribavirin has been shown to be effective against this virus. Yet, Homeland Security is telling the CDC not to make any announcements until stockpiles of the drug can be secured.
Well, Dr. Gupta, there continue to be evaluations of several drugs. Ribavirin is among them. But right now, our best defense has been social distancing. No handshaking, staying home when you're sick, washing your hands frequently.
I think we can claim that Contagion, which tells the story of a flu that starts in China before ravaging across the whole world, has already saved at least a few lives during this crisis. After all, the posters themselves contain the extremely useful advice: don't talk to anyone, don't touch anyone. It also reminds us not to touch our own face, highly useful, and to constantly wash our hands, also important. The film has seen a huge resurgence since the outbreak of the coronavirus, especially thanks to its hyperlink narrative that feels like reading a live news update scroll, too many stories happening on too many levels at once to ever truly process.
Let me bring in Alan Crumwoody into this debate as well. Alan's a freelance journalist. He was the first to track the Shinko Busman video. Alan, today on Twitter, you wrote that the truth about this virus is being kept from the world by the CDC, by the World Health Organization, to allow friends of the current administration to benefit from it, both financially and physically.
There are therapies we know are effective right now, like forsythia, and they don't even appear on the CDC website.
On your blog, you also wrote that the World Health Organization is somehow in bed with pharmaceutical companies.
One character in particular has proved particularly prescient. A conspiracy theorist played with perfect loathsomeness by Jude Law. He preaches adamantly to use a drug called forsythia, a homeopathic solution which he believes may contain the cure to the disease. And people believe what he is saying, overwhelming pharmacies in order to get the drug. In an infinitely depressing turn of events, this conspiracy theorist now resides in the highest office in the world. Donald Trump himself, ever annoying, has been prescribing drugs that have not successfully been tested to defeat the disease, endangering the lives of millions of people who may take his advice seriously. Yet while Jude Law's character is eventually arrested for conspiracy and securities fraud, the crook who runs the USA is still allowed to hold daily press conferences spouting whatever rubbish comes into his head. And even more impressively, his approval ratings haven't faltered that much. Sometimes even apocalyptic movies can't predict the infinite power of human stupidity. Final lesson is to never give up hope, courtesy of Children of Men. My favourite apocalypse movie of all time has to be the stunning Children of Men, which sees Clive Owen play a beaten down bureaucrat who somehow has the future of humanity thrusted into his hands. This is Owen's best performance, his sad eyes and sardonic posture, a perfect conduit for how the world around him has slowly fallen to pieces. The film is set in the year 2027, and after 18 years of global human infertility, basically meaning no more babies have been born for this entire time, and economic depression, humanity now stands on the brink. One of the few nations holding things together is the UK, where fascist World War II era-esque imagery is on full display, but life must go on as usual. Refugees are rounded up and bounded into camps, of course, but the average Brit goes to work and carries on, making Children of Men hit a little too close to home. Owen himself is simply getting a coffee when the shop behind him drastically explodes. Then all of a sudden, when his ex reappears from nowhere, with a pregnant refugee holding the key to humanity's future, suddenly this deeply cynical man has a reason to believe in humanity again. Children of Men was released in 2006, but never feels more relevant than it does now to the current moment, especially the various ways that the UK has moved from an open, tolerant country to one based on mistrust and fear of the other, exemplified by our handling of Brexit, the refugee crisis, and the shameful Windrush scandal. It's worth always remembering that during these crises, it's minorities, refugees, people of colour, people in the global south, poor people, that get the worst end of the stick. Now with the Tories' dismantling of the NHS playing out on a grand, potentially devastating scale, we could see this world get exponentially worse. Yet, Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men, by using the metaphor of a pregnant woman upon which to pin the future of humanity, reminds us that hope can come in the very smallest of forms, and that the tiniest slice of hope can be the one thing that ensures humanity's safety. In one beautiful scene, the army and rebels of the refugee base suddenly cease fighting when they see the baby, allowing it to move out of harm's way, all done in one extraordinary long take. This is some of the best examples of form meeting function in cinema history. And yet, while things aren't currently as bleak as Children of Men may make out, the world does have the potential, give or take another war, or economic depression, or the acceleration of the current climate crisis, to quickly descend into these kind of issues. But by using someone with as depressing and as cynical eyes as Clive Owen as this conduit for hope, Children of Men reminds us of the utter importance of never ever giving up and seeing things through even in the worst of scandals. Likewise, we will get through this current crisis. We just have to keep believing and marrying that belief with affirmative action. This has been Cinemascapes with me, Redmond Bacon, now available on SoundCloud and YouTube, as well as on some RSS feeds. I am looking forward to my next podcast. Please check in next time to see what I will talk about next.